What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Michael here, and we gotta talk about Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar. Everyone's been talking about it for the last week. It's one of the greatest performances ever and will stand the test of time. However, I'm here to ask, is it the greatest performance of all time? In other words, how good was his performance really? No doubt, it's one of the greatest performances of all time. But what we want to do is see just how well it stacks up against other great performances over the years of MMA. So what I've done is I've taken a couple matches that I believe were some of the most unbelievable performances I've ever seen. So how I decided to kind of separate these from the rest is based on the criteria of A, strength of competition. So how good was the other person across the cage? B, rate of ass whooping. So how much of an ass whooping did that person give on the opponent? C, statistics, right? Because the eyes can always say one thing, but just how much did the statistics back it up? And D, overall significance in the long term. Now, obviously, for Max Holloway's fight with Calvin Kattar, because that fight happened literally a week ago, this one is more up for debate and conjecture. But I want to put it for the other matches I put on here. So when putting that criteria ahead, I have a couple matches. The first one is Renan Barão versus TJ Dillashaw 1, as Renan Barão was considered one of the greatest bantamweights of all time, and TJ came in there and absolutely schooled him. We got Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin, which I believe to be Anderson Silva's best performance ever. And we have actually two Ronda Rousey matchups. One is Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey, as this is considered one of the greatest upsets of all time. And the second is Amanda Nunes versus Ronda Rousey. In my opinion, if we're just going by rate of ass whooping alone, this, I think, is the biggest ass whooping someone gave their opponent. Amanda Nunes just mercilessly destroyed Ronda Rousey. So, right away, I'm just going to say that Amanda Nunes versus Ronda Rousey is out. Now, Ronda Rousey will go down as one of the most dominant female champions of all time, next to Amanda Nunes. And I think at this point, Ronda Rousey was still considered one of the greatest of all time among the rank of women's mixed martial artists and was a pioneer of the sport. But by this point, clearly she was not the same. So I think that in terms of strength of competition, she's out. Leaving the Holly Holm fight, TJ Dillashaw versus Renan Barão 1, and Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin in comparison to Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar. Now, for me, I think Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey, I think is the greatest performance in terms of strength of competition in relative to Holly Holm. Now, a lot of people forget just how dominant Ronda Rousey was. There was a complaint that Ronda Rousey matches were going the length of Instagram videos. They were too short. They wasted $60 to watch a 1-minute fight or a 30-second fight. Also, side note, I bet a ton of money on Holly Holm and made out like a bandit. So it has a soft spot in my heart as one of the greatest performances of all time. Not gonna lie, I'm a little biased. But the thing about this fight is, Holly Holm has had a checkered record since. I mean, her first title defense was a Hail Mary loss to Miesha Tate. And okay, fine, it was a Hail Mary loss. But then she went on a losing streak before beating Bethe Correia. And then another losing streak. So, because of that, she's out. Leaving TJ Dillashaw versus Renan Barão 1. And Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin. Now, this is where it gets really tight. Because here's the thing. Statistically, Max Holloway kills both of these fights. No doubt. It's not even a question. He landed the most significant strikes of any fighter on this list. He has the greatest strike differential between him and his opponent than any other fighter on this list. And he set all kinds of records for the most strikes landed and the most output landed. It was a truly impressive performance when you look at the stats. When you look at the strength of competition, though, this is where it gets a little bit tight. Now, Calvin Kattar, very, very tough opponent, very good opponent, number 6 in the world at the time, which I think is a little bit low for him. I would have put him above Korean Zombie, but regardless, really, really tough opponent, really high ranked, and a very risky fight for Max Holloway. But Anderson Silva took out a guy who was one fight removed from being the UFC light heavyweight champion at a time when the light heavyweight championship was considered the cream of the crop in the UFC. And TJ Dillashaw took out a guy who at the time was on a 32 fight unbeaten streak. So when it comes to strength of competition or strength of the opponent and relative to you, I think it's safe to say that that's where Max Holloway's performance does lose some points. And it's weird because I think the product of MMA and the competition has never been better. But I'm talking in relative to your time. This isn't a discussion. Renan Barão was considered something special, and no one gave TJ Dillashaw a chance. And Anderson Silva, again, was facing a former UFC light heavyweight champion in a time when that division was star-studded. Most of the UFC's big stars came from that division. So, to me, it's like this. I think, depending on what you value, either one of these three could be the greatest performance in a UFC cage of all time. But I think, to me, in terms of records and sheer numbers, Max Holloway's got to get the nod. Now, this is where we get into the where does this stack up into the history books dynamic. Ironically, I think it depends on if Max wins the featherweight championship again. If Max Holloway were to win that featherweight championship again and go on a run, then I think what will happen is people will look at this Kattar fight as kind of his evolution or next level that he brought. But if he doesn't win the featherweight championship again and, still is a good fighter or a great fighter, but just doesn't win it again, then I think people will just look at this as a cool moment, but not really the greatest performance they've seen. But anyway, that's the video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, do what you do. And until next time, remember it's a pandemic out there, so stay safe.